Hi everyone. Welcome back. We're glad to have you with us today. Liam discovered his wife's secret life with a man he thought he could trust. What Liam did next changed everything for all of them. So let's start. I caught my wife, Laura, with another man at the company party. The loud music and bursts of laughter faded into the background, replaced by the pounding of blood in my ears. I shouldn't have been there. It wasn't part of the plan. Maybe that's exactly why they felt safe. When I saw them, my breath caught in my throat. They didn't touch each other after noticing me, but their guilty expressions gave everything away. Laura froze, her face turning pale, and the man, Kevin, stepped back, as if that would somehow hide the betrayal. I didn't need an explanation. There wasn't a single excuse that could justify what my eyes had already seen. My heart was racing, but my face stayed blank. Inside, something had already broken, and I knew there was no going back from this. They tried to speak, but there was nothing to say. Laura murmured my name like that could stop me, like the sound of it would erase the scene I was witnessing. Kevin darted his eyes around, searching for a way out, while I stood there, staring them down. I knew that if I opened my mouth, my voice would crack, not out of weakness, but from the weight of the hatred building inside me. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was how natural they looked together. Like this wasn't the first time. Like I was the one interrupting something normal. I felt like an outsider, an intruder in my own life. I wanted to ask how long it had been going on. I wanted to know where and why. I wanted to ask what I did to deserve this. But at the same time, I didn't want to hear any of it. I just wanted to leave, to walk out, to erase the image from my mind. God, I wished it was all just a nightmare. Laura took a step toward me, her eyes filled with tears. She reached out, like she still had the right to touch me. I backed away, immediately, the disgust hitting me hard. She saw it on my face, she knew. And in that moment, we both realized I'd never look at her the same way again. Forgiveness? That wasn't even a possibility. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling, to know that everything we had built together, every moment, every promise, was shattered. And worse, it had been destroyed in the cheapest, most meaningless way. Kevin tried to speak, but I didn't let him. I turned and left. My whole body was trembling, but my mind was already focused. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg for answers. No, I was going to destroy everything. I wasn't going to be the one who lost in this story. They thought I was just a side character in their little romance. They were wrong. I was going to be the storm that swept in and tore their lives apart. On the drive home, the images from that night played on a loop in my head. Laura's hand on his arm. The way they looked at each other before they saw me. The way Kevin stepped away from her, like she was worth more than I ever had been. It ate at me, gnawed at my mind, and wouldn't let go. Later that night, Laura came home. I had tears in my eyes, but I didn't feel anything anymore. I watched her as she walked in, trying to explain herself. Her words tumbled out in desperation. She swore it was a mistake, that it meant nothing. But her words were empty, hollow. I noticed the details. Her smudged makeup, the scent of alcohol mixed with his cheap cologne. The pathetic attempt to look innocent when we both knew she was guilty. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just stared at her. And it was that silence that broke her. Because silence carries judgment. It carries contempt. And it carries finality. She knew what was coming before I even moved. When I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the table, she collapsed to her knees, crying. But it was already over. Divorce wouldn't be a simple procedure. It was going to be a spectacle. I'd make sure of that. They had no idea what was coming. But what I didn't realize was that I didn't know the whole truth either. I thought that night was the worst of it. I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. There was something bigger brewing, something none of us were prepared for. And when it all came to light, it wouldn't just be their lives that crumbled. It would be mine too. I thought I knew exactly what needed to be done to bring it all to an end. But the truth? I was wrong. Very wrong. And when the full story finally came to light, it wasn't just their lives that collapsed. It was mine too. Because sometimes, revenge demands a price far greater than we're ready to pay. And I was about to find that out in the worst possible way. The room shimmered with golden lights that reflected off the glasses and fine fabrics of the guests' clothes. It was a night of celebration. People moved between tables, laughing and chatting, their spirits high. Liam stood in the hallway, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. He took a steadying breath before heading back into the crowd. He always carried himself with quiet confidence and impeccable posture, traits that made him both respected at work and admired in social settings. His smile was easy, but his eyes were constantly scanning, always paying attention to the little details around him. That night was no different. His eyes naturally found Laura, his wife, standing near the bar, chatting with a small group. She laughed lightly, her voice carrying through the room. Laura had always been naturally charming. The way she moved her hands when she spoke or tilted her head to listen made it clear she knew how to hold people's attention. She wore a fitted red dress that hugged her figure perfectly, turning heads as she passed by. Liam used to joke that she could light up any room without even trying. But tonight, something about her seemed different. There was a certain energy in her eyes, a tension he couldn't quite place. From the outside, their relationship looked perfect. Married for 8 years, they had built a life that others admired. Laura's charisma perfectly balanced Liam's seriousness, and together they shared a life filled with trips, parties, and unforgettable moments. But behind those polished appearances, subtle cracks had started to form. Liam spent long hours at work, pouring himself into his career. And though Laura loved him, she often mentioned feeling lonely at home. Their conversations about it were delicate, usually ending with promises of change that never quite materialized. That night, Liam felt a particular sense of pride. The event he was hosting marked a milestone for his company, a celebration of his hard work and success. Everything seemed perfect, but even with the smiles and toasts, something in the back of his mind wouldn't let him relax. Maybe it was the exhaustion from months of relentless work, or perhaps it was the anticipation of finally taking a few days off. Whatever it was, he couldn't shake that nagging feeling of unease. Determined to brush it off, Liam approached the group where Laura stood. When she saw him, her smile widened as she introduced him to her friends. Liam exchanged handshakes and polite greetings, but he noticed something strange. Her smile seemed forced, her shoulders tense in a way he couldn't quite explain. When he wrapped an arm around her waist, she stiffened briefly before relaxing again. Laura leaned in to kiss his cheek, but her gaze shifted away, avoiding eye contact. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it made Liam's stomach twist. As the night went on, he tried to focus on the event. He chatted with colleagues, shared jokes, and toasted important clients. But no matter what, his attention kept drifting back to Laura. She kept up her charming persona, smiling and engaging with everyone around her. But there was a distance in her eyes, a distraction. Her gaze swept the room, scanning it repeatedly as if she was looking for someone. That feeling in Liam's chest grew heavier. He tried to push it down, but it wouldn't go away. He thought back to when they first met. Laura had been so full of dreams and ideas back then. She was a graphic designer, just starting her own business, and her ambition had impressed him. He admired how she managed to balance her creativity with a sense of determination. They got married 2 years later in a beautiful outdoor ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. In those early years, life felt like a fairy tale. But over time, subtle changes crept in. Liam's work began demanding more of him. He was always traveling, always busy. And although Laura stood by him, the weight of their routine began to wear on her. He knew she felt it. She had mentioned it before, that loneliness, that disconnect. But he always believed their love was strong enough to endure anything. Until tonight, for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. When Laura excused herself to go to the bathroom, Liam's eyes followed her as she moved across the room. She walked quickly, her head down, as if avoiding someone's gaze. That behavior made his chest tighten. He wanted to follow her. His instincts told him to, but he resisted, shaking off the thought. He told himself it was ridiculous, just his tired mind playing tricks on him. It was an important night. He couldn't let insecurity take hold. Still, that nagging feeling wouldn't let go. Liam tried to shift his focus back to the conversations around him, but he barely registered what anyone was saying. His mind kept drifting, distracted by the tension he couldn't shake. A few minutes later, Laura returned, but she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man Liam vaguely recognized. He was one of the newer managers, someone Liam had only met briefly in passing. The moment Liam saw them together, something didn't sit right. Their body language felt off. They were laughing at something, their ease around each other a little too natural. The sight immediately put Liam on edge. Forcing a polite smile, Liam greeted the man as he approached. Their handshake was firm, but there was an underlying challenge in it that Liam didn't miss. After years of tough negotiations, Liam had learned to pick up on the subtle cues people give away, and at that moment, he could feel something wasn't right. Laura, on the other hand, acted like everything was completely normal. She pulled Liam into the conversation, going out of her way to praise him in front of the man. She spoke about his dedication, about how the success of the event was all thanks to his hard work. Liam nodded along, grateful for her words, but that uneasy feeling in his chest refused to go away. The way the man's eyes lingered just a little too long, and the way Laura seemed hyper-aware of his presence. Every little gesture felt loaded with meaning Liam couldn't quite decipher. He remained on high alert for the rest of the night, watching Laura as she moved through the crowd. She spoke to different groups, laughing and engaging as she always did, but every so often, their eyes would meet. And each time, she smiled at him, a soft, reassuring smile that, for a moment, made Liam question himself. Was he overthinking things? Letting the stress of the event cloud his judgment? But the restlessness never left him. Deep down, he knew something wasn't right. He could feel it in his gut. Something was coming, something that would change everything. As the party began to wind down, Laura seemed more at ease. She approached Liam, slipped her hand into his, and gave it a firm squeeze, as if to reassure him. Liam squeezed back, but inside, he was battling a growing fear, the fear that he was right. When they got home, Liam barely slept. The air in the room felt stifling, even with the window cracked open. Laura lay beside him, facing away, the space between them feeling vast and unbridgeable. Liam stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the party. The laughter, the exchanged glances, the tension he couldn't ignore. It all spun in his head like a broken record. His mind raced, wondering if he was reading too much into it. Was he being paranoid? But that tight feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the way Laura avoided his gaze, in the way the man seemed far too comfortable around her. The next morning, Laura got up early. Liam watched in silence as she carefully styled her hair and chose a different perfume than the one she usually wore. She told him she had some things to take care of at work and would be leaving earlier than usual. He nodded, watching her closely. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, more calculated than spontaneous. She leaned down to give him a quick kiss on the cheek before walking out the door. And as Liam stood there alone, he felt like something precious had slipped through his fingers. The day dragged on. Liam tried to focus on work, but he couldn't get the image of Laura and the man out of his mind. No matter how hard he tried to push it aside, it kept coming back, gnawing at him. Finally, he decided to send her a casual text, asking how her day was going. Her response took longer than usual, and when it finally came, the tone felt off, dry, distant. Not like her usual replies. That was the moment Liam knew he couldn't keep living with this doubt. He needed answers. He couldn't let it fester any longer. So, he left work early and drove to Laura's office. It felt excessive. He knew it did, but something inside him wouldn't let it go. He had to know the truth. When he pulled into the parking lot, he spotted her car. But when he checked the building, she wasn't there. He waited. Nearly half an hour passed before he saw her walk out. And she wasn't alone. The same man from the party was with her. They were laughing, walking side by side, too close for comfort. Liam's stomach dropped, his whole world seeming to slow down around him. He wanted to believe it wasn't what it looked like, that there was some innocent explanation. But the way Laura tilted her head toward the man as he spoke, the way he leaned in, like they shared something private, told him otherwise. Liam followed them, keeping a safe distance, his breathing shallow as he tried to keep his emotions in check. They ended up at a small, out-of-the-way restaurant. The kind of discreet place you wouldn't stumble upon by accident. Liam parked his car and watched through the window. They sat in a secluded corner, and Laura leaned in close to the man, her body language intimate, familiar. Liam's chest tightened, his heart pounding in his ears. Part of him wanted to burst in right then and there, to confront them, but another part held him back. He needed to see more. He needed to be sure. When they finally left the restaurant, the sun had dipped below the horizon. It was already dark. As they stepped out, Laura briefly took the man's arm before letting go, as if she'd realized they were in public and needed to keep a little distance. Liam followed them again, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. This time, they stopped at a hotel. Liam parked across the street and sat there frozen. He watched as they walked through the glass doors together, disappearing inside. And in that moment, everything he'd been holding on is shattered. There was no more doubt, no more second-guessing. The truth was right in front of him. Liam felt his blood run cold as he watched them disappear through the hotel's glass doors. There were no more doubts. The confirmation of his worst fears was right there in front of him. Laura hadn't just betrayed his trust. She had destroyed the years of history they had built together. He stayed in the car, unable to move, his hands shaking on the steering wheel as his mind struggled to accept what he had just witnessed. Anger boiled inside him, but with it came a sharp, piercing pain, a pain that seemed to cut him from the inside out. He thought about rushing into the hotel and confronting them both right there, but something stopped him. He didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to destroy the control he had always prided himself on in a moment of desperation. Instead, he drove home, but once there, he couldn't stay still. He paced back and forth, each step heavier than the last. Several times, he picked up his phone, staring at Laura's name on the screen. But he couldn't call her. He didn't know what he would say if she answered. The image of her with another man wouldn't leave his mind. He tried to remember happier moments, their trips, the nights they spent laughing together. But even those memories felt tainted now, contaminated by what he had seen. When Laura finally came home, hours later, Liam was sitting on the couch, staring into space. She walked in with a forced smile, asking, "How was your day?" He looked up slowly, taking in every detail of her face. He saw guilt there, but also the effort to hide it. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. She hesitated for a second, just long enough to confirm what he already knew. "I stayed late at work," she said. That lie. It came out so naturally, so smoothly, as if she had rehearsed it. And that's when Liam knew. There was no going back. The trust between them was broken beyond repair. He didn't say anything more. He just watched her, and the silence grew heavier by the second. Laura shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Liam gave her a small smile, but it wasn't a warm one. "Yeah," he said. "Everything's fine." But nothing was fine, and Laura knew it. That night, Liam barely slept. He lay next to her, staring at the ceiling while her breathing remained calm and steady, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket. Eventually, he got out of bed and went to the living room. The house was dark and silent, amplifying the emptiness he felt inside. He walked to the bar, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and took a long sip, ignoring the time. He needed something to quiet his thoughts, to help him think clearly. A few minutes later, he heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Laura appeared, her hair messy, her expression surprised to see him up. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked cautiously. Liam swirled the whiskey in his glass. "Just thinking," he replied, his voice steady. Laura took a few steps closer, her gaze searching his face. "Is everything okay?" she asked again. Hearing her voice made his throat tighten. It was almost unbearable to listen to her, knowing what she had done. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Just some work stuff." She seemed relieved, but Liam noticed how she quickly looked away. She knew something was different, but she seemed determined to keep pretending everything was normal. The next day, Liam tried to go about his routine. He made calls, talked to colleagues, and sent emails. all while pretending to be fine. But the images from the night before wouldn't leave him. By lunchtime, he couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers. He left work early and drove to Laura's office. Her car was parked outside, so he waited, watching the building. Not long after, she came out. And once again, she wasn't alone. The same man from the party was with her. They walked side by side, keeping a careful distance that made it look innocent to anyone watching. But Liam knew better. Their attempt to appear casual only confirmed that they were hiding something. He followed them, his heart pounding in his chest, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. This time, they didn't go to a restaurant. Instead, they headed to a small apartment complex. Liam's chest tightened as he parked the car. He watched them enter the building without hesitation. There was no more doubt, no more second-guessing. He got out of the car and climbed the narrow staircase, each step echoing in his mind like a countdown to disaster. When he reached the door, he knocked loudly, the sound reverberating down the hall. Seconds later, the door opened. Laura's face went pale when she saw him standing there. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Behind her, the man appeared, his expression hardening when he realized who was at the door. Liam felt his blood boil. Without waiting for an invitation, he stepped inside, forcing Laura to back up. She closed the door behind him, her hands shaking. Liam, she started, her voice trembling. He raised his hand, cutting her off. His gaze locked on hers, cold and unwavering. "I'm not here for excuses," he said quietly. "I want the truth." Liam demanded to know what was going on, his voice sharp and unwavering. Laura tried to calm him down, insisting it wasn't what it seemed, but her trembling voice betrayed her. The man stepped forward, trying to sound reasonable. "Let's talk calmly," he said, but Liam shot him a look that made the words die in his throat. Finally, Laura admitted there was something between them. "It was a mistake, a moment of weakness," she whispered. Liam let out a short, bitter laugh that made her flinch. "How long?" he asked coldly. Laura hesitated. "Too long." That pause told Liam everything he needed to know. This wasn't recent. His chest tightened, but he stood firm. He wanted more than vague confessions. He wanted the full truth. That's when Laura broke down, her words coming out in fragmented sobs. Each one felt like a blade cutting into Liam. It wasn't just emotional, she confessed through her tears. It wasn't a passing thing. Liam clenched his fists, fighting to stay composed as the weight of her words crushed him. The man wasn't just a lover. He was someone who had access to Liam's work. Laura admitted that he worked directly with Liam and had gained access to confidential company information. In that moment, Liam felt the ground fall away beneath him. This wasn't just about their marriage. It was about his career, his reputation, his entire life. Laura kept talking, but the words blurred in Liam's mind. It all started with harmless conversations, but the man had used her vulnerability to manipulate her. She'd felt lonely, invisible. He'd planted seeds of doubt, convincing her that Liam didn't care anymore. Liam's anger rose, but underneath it, a deeper pain gnawed at him. The feeling that everything he'd built was crumbling. The man tried to defend himself, claiming there was no manipulation, just real feelings. But Liam had heard enough. He lunged, grabbing the man by the collar and shoving him against the wall. His voice was low, seething with fury. "How dare you? How dare you use my wife to ruin everything we built? Out of greed." The man squirmed, trying to break free, but Liam slammed him back against the wall. "This isn't over," Liam growled. His words hung heavy in the air, a warning. "Liam, please," Laura cried, stepping between them. "I never wanted to hurt you. It was a mistake, and I regret it every day." Liam released the man, his chest heaving. He turned to Laura, his eyes filled with hurt. "Do you really think your apologies can fix this?" Laura's tears streamed down her face as she tried to get closer, but Liam took a step back, creating distance she had created the moment she betrayed him. The disappointment and anger coursing through Liam made it hard to breathe. He couldn't stand to be in that room any longer. Without a word, he left. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove aimlessly through the city. His hands shook on the steering wheel, and his thoughts spun out of control. He had no plan, just an overwhelming need to keep moving. When Laura returned home that night, she sat on the couch, staring at the familiar surroundings. Everything looked different. The walls, the furniture, the paintings they'd chosen together. All of it seemed empty, false. The life they had built felt like a lie. Liam knew he couldn't let this go. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. He had to act quickly to protect what was his, to stop things from spiraling further out of control. But deep down, what hurt the most was the cruel truth that, despite everything, he still loved Laura. And that made it all so much worse. As the phone rang, Liam stared out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, but nothing felt real. Laura's words echoed in his mind like a hammer, relentless and unforgiving. He downed the last of the whiskey in his glass, barely remembering when he poured it. His phone buzzed on the table. Laura. He ignored it. He didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want more excuses or justifications. But a part of him knew he had to face her. He needed to get everything out before he lost his nerve. Grabbing his car keys, Liam left the house. The place that once felt warm and familiar now felt cold and distant. When he returned, Laura was on the couch, her eyes red and puffy. She stood up as soon as he entered, but Liam raised his hand, stopping her from speaking. Not yet, he said, his voice steady but cold. He walked to the center of the room slowly, feeling the weight of the conversation to come. Laura opened her mouth, but Liam was faster. How did it start? He asked bluntly. She hesitated, but she knew there was no point in hiding anymore. It started after you began working late, traveling more. I was alone. Her voice cracked as she continued. At first, it was just friendship, someone I could talk to about feeling lonely, frustrated. But it became more. Liam's jaw tightened. Why didn't you talk to me? He asked, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Laura bit her lip, looking down. I tried, but I felt invisible, like you weren't there anymore. Why? Liam asked, his voice steady but cold. Why did you choose another man instead of fighting for our relationship? Laura looked at him, tears falling uncontrollably. I tried, she whispered. I really tried, but I felt ignored, invisible. Liam clenched his fists, fighting the urge to scream. That's not a justification, he said firmly. Nothing can justify betrayal. Laura shook her head, wiping her tears. I know that, but I got stuck in something I couldn't stop. And the scheme? Liam asked sharply. The man's involvement with the company? What did you give him? Laura hesitated, trying to avoid the question, but Liam pressed on. Tell me. Finally, she confessed. I handed over confidential documents, reports, information. I thought I was helping someone I trusted. Liam felt his stomach drop. His mind struggled to process her words. You gave him company information? He asked, his voice rising slightly. Laura nodded, her hands trembling. He promised he'd leave me alone, but he didn't. He kept pressuring me, threatening to expose our relationship if I didn't cooperate. Liam's chest tightened. His hands shook. And you thought you could hide this from me? I was scared, Laura cried. I never wanted to hurt you. Liam let out a short, bitter laugh. Did you really think you could get out of this without consequences? Laura tried to get closer, but Liam stepped back. I don't know who you are anymore, he said quietly. The woman I loved is a stranger now. Laura broke down, sobbing harder. I can fix this. Please, I can fix it. Liam shut his eyes for a moment, his voice steady. What else are you hiding? What do I still need to know? Laura went silent, biting her lip. The room felt suffocating in the silence. Liam stepped closer, his voice cold. Tell me everything. Her voice shook as she finally revealed the worst. He wants to destroy you. Not just professionally, but personally. Liam's blood ran cold. Destroy me? Laura nodded. There are photos, messages, records. He said he'd use them against you. Even if they're manipulated, he said they could ruin you. Liam clenched his jaw. And you thought giving him more would protect me? Laura dropped to her knees, sobbing. I thought I could stop it. I thought I could protect you. Liam stared at her, his face hard. Protect me? You handed him everything he needed to destroy me. I didn't know what else to do, Laura cried. I'm sorry. Liam's voice remained cold. Sorry won't fix this. She nodded slowly. I'll do anything. I'll expose him. I'll take responsibility. Are you ready to face the consequences? Liam asked. Are you willing to take responsibility for what you've done? Laura hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes. Liam grabbed his phone and made a few quick calls. Laura watched him in silence, realizing he was already planning his next steps. When he hung up, he turned to her. Gather everything. Every message. Every document. Laura wiped her tears and moved quickly to retrieve her files. Liam sat at the table, flipping through the documents she placed in front of him, reviewing every detail. He was cold, methodical. Laura cried quietly from time to time, but he didn't comfort her. He couldn't. Not yet. When they finished, Liam stood and grabbed his coat. Wait, Laura said softly. You shouldn't go alone. Liam shook his head. I have to. Without another word, he left the house. The drive was quiet, but his mind was racing. Laura's face and her words echoed in his head with every mile he drove. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, his determination growing. When he reached the building, he parked outside and sat for a moment, leaving the engine running. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was cold and calculating. He turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, the cold night air hitting his face. He climbed the steps slowly, each footfall echoing in the empty hallway. When he knocked, the door opened quickly. The man stood there with a smug smile that disappeared as soon as he saw Liam. He tried to close the door, but Liam pushed it open, stepping inside without asking permission. The man raised his hands in a calming gesture. Let's talk, he said. Liam's eyes stayed locked on him. We're going to do more than talk, he said, his voice low. The man took a step back, his shoulders tense, but Liam followed. You used my wife, Liam said, his voice sharp and cold. You tried to destroy everything I've built. The man opened his mouth to respond, but Liam cut him off. I'm not here for excuses, Liam said. I'm here to make sure you pay. The weight of the moment spread throughout the room. Liam's gaze remained fixed on the man before him. Sit down, Liam said, his voice low and firm. The man hesitated, standing stiffly by the couch, but when Liam slowly stepped forward, closing the distance between them, the man backed away and sat down, almost out of instinct. Liam stood over him, his expression cold and unyielding. The words came out low and sharp. He didn't need to shout to make his anger clear. How did you have the nerve to infiltrate my life? To manipulate Laura and destroy everything we built? Liam asked. The man laughed, but it was a nervous, forced sound. You should be grateful, he said. I showed you the truth. Laura was never happy with you. I just helped her realize what she really wanted. Liam leaned in, his gaze cutting like a blade. Do you really think you can escape the consequences? That you'll get away with everything you've done? The man shifted in his seat, but tried to maintain control. Laura made her own choices, he said defensively. I didn't force her to do anything. Liam's jaw tightened. His voice grew firmer. I know about the threats. I know every word you used to manipulate her into staying away from me. I know about the stolen documents and the leaked information. You planned every move to destroy me. The man was silent for a moment, then tried to turn the situation around. You neglected her, he accused. You were too focused on work to notice what was happening. If you'd paid attention to her, none of this would have happened. Liam didn't flinch. His expression didn't change. Nothing justifies what you did, he said coldly, and you will be held accountable. When Liam stood, the man quickly stood as well, trying to regain control. We can end this now, the man said. Just let it go. Walk away, and it won't go any further. Liam smiled, a cold, chilling smile that made the man take a step back. There's no going back. Tonight marks the beginning of the end for you. The man's expression faltered. Be careful, he warned. You don't want to make things worse for yourself. Liam didn't respond. Without a word, he turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. In the car, Liam gripped the steering wheel tightly. His hands shook slightly from the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The confrontation hadn't solved everything, but it had made one thing clear. He wouldn't be brought down without a fight. This battle was far from over. When Liam arrived home, He found Laura sitting at the dining table. Her face was pale, marked by exhaustion and tears. She stood up the moment she saw him, her eyes full of questions. Liam walked past her without a word, heading straight for his office. Laura followed him. "Liam," she called softly. "What happened?" He sat at his desk and steadied himself before speaking. "I confronted him," he said plainly. "I made it clear that this isn't over." Laura stood silently, absorbing his words. "What happens now?" she asked after a long pause. Liam's gaze was hard. "Now we keep going. I need more evidence. What we have so far isn't enough to make sure we come out of this clean." Laura took a hesitant step forward. "I want to help," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, let me help fix this." Liam shook his head. "I don't know if I can trust you," he said quietly. "Not after everything." Tears welled in Laura's eyes again. "I'll do anything," she whispered. "Please give me a chance." Liam stared at her for a long time. Finally he spoke. "That depends on what you're willing to sacrifice." The following days were marked by tension and silence. Liam spent most of his time in the office or meeting with lawyers and consultants, working tirelessly to gather more evidence. Laura moved through her daily routine quietly, but every step seemed weighted down with guilt and regret. One night, while Liam was still in his office, Laura walked in holding an envelope. "I found more documents," she said softly, placing the envelope on his desk. "There might be something useful in there." Liam took the envelope but didn't open it right away. "I'll look at it tomorrow," he said without looking up. Laura lingered for a moment, waiting for some kind of response. When none came, she turned and left without another word. The next morning, Liam opened the envelope and began reviewing its contents. Among the papers, he found something that made his blood run cold. A message from Laura's lover, sent just days before, threatening to expose everything if she didn't keep cooperating. Liam's hands trembled as he read the words. His anger boiled, but beneath it he saw something else. Proof that Laura had been manipulated, trapped until the very end. It didn't erase her betrayal, but it gave him a clearer picture of her situation. He picked up his phone and called Laura. "Meet me in the office," he said. When she arrived, she looked anxious, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Liam handed her the message. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" he asked, his voice steady but tense. Laura's lip quivered as she spoke. "I was scared," she whispered. "I thought if I told you it would make things worse. I thought I could fix it myself." Liam studied her carefully before speaking. "I need to know one thing," he said. "Are you willing to go all the way? To end this and take him down?" Without hesitation, Laura nodded. "Yes, I'll do whatever it takes." In the days that followed, Liam worked tirelessly to put together a detailed plan. Using the documents Laura provided, he tracked every move the man had made, every vulnerability, every weakness. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. And Liam wasn't going to stop until the man who tried to destroy him was left with nothing. Laura helped with everything, even though she knew it meant risking her own reputation. The tension between them was palpable, lingering in every interaction. But they both understood there was no turning back. They had to keep moving forward. One night, as they were finalizing preparations, Laura looked at Liam. Her voice was hesitant, quiet. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" Liam didn't respond right away. He stared at the papers in front of him, lost in thought. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but distant. "I don't know. Time will tell." Laura nodded slowly, accepting the uncertainty. They didn't say anything more, but the silence between them felt less oppressive. For the first time, there was a faint glimpse of something that could still be rebuilt. The next morning, Liam left early. He knew that day would mark the beginning of the end for the man who had tried to destroy everything he'd built. He also knew that, no matter the outcome, nothing would ever be the same again. But he was ready to face it, even if it meant losing everything along the way. The weight of each decision sat heavily on his shoulders as he waited in the empty parking lot. The cold wind cut through the silence, adding to the tension that hung in the air. Liam checked the clock repeatedly, counting the minutes until the moment arrived. Laura sat next to him in the car, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. She didn't speak, but her quick, shallow breaths gave away her fear. Liam kept his eyes on the entrance to the building ahead, knowing that once the man arrived, there would be no turning back. Everything they had worked for over the past few days would culminate in this moment. Finally, Laura broke the silence, her voice tentative. "Are you sure this is the right thing to do?" Liam turned to look at her. He saw regret in her eyes, but he couldn't find any pity within himself. His voice was firm. "It's too late to have doubts." At the end of the street, a car appeared. Liam's heart pounded faster as he watched it approach. The man parked casually, unaware of what was about to happen. He got out of the car without a care, completely oblivious to the storm headed his way. Laura reached out, grabbing Liam's arm as if she wanted to stop him. "Maybe we—" Liam gently pulled his arm away and opened the door. Without hesitation, he stepped out of the car and quickly approached the man, blocking his path. The man stopped in his tracks, surprise flickering across his face before he tried to mask it with a smug grin. "Liam," he greeted with false confidence, flashing a teasing smile. What a surprise! Liam wasn't in the mood for games. He pulled a thick envelope from his coat and shoved it into the man's hands. "I know everything." The man's expression shifted as he opened the envelope. His face paled as he flipped through the documents inside. Falsified reports, messages, financial records. The evidence was undeniable. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice wavered. "This won't hold up. You're bluffing." Liam stepped closer, his gaze cold and unrelenting. "Copies have already been sent to my lawyers and the authorities." The man's bravado cracked. He held up his hands, palms out. "Wait, we don't need to do this. We can work something out." Liam didn't flinch. "There are two options. Disappear quietly, or face the public and legal consequences." Before the man could respond, Laura stepped out of the car. The man's eyes widened when he saw her. "You're with him?" he asked, disbelief coloring his voice. "You're really taking his side?" Laura stood tall, meeting his gaze without hesitation. She gave a single, firm nod. The man let out a bitter laugh. "Naive," he spat. "Do you really think he'll ever forgive you? You're ruining your only chance of getting out of that empty marriage." Laura's expression didn't change. Her voice was steady. "I'd rather face the consequences of my mistakes than continue to be manipulated." The man stepped toward her, but Liam moved between them, shoving him back with a hard push. His voice was calm, but deadly serious. "This is your last warning." The man stumbled back, glaring at Liam, but he didn't make another move. Finally, he seemed to understand that he'd lost. Without a word, he turned and got back into his car. As he drove away, Liam watched him go, knowing this wasn't truly the end. There would be investigations, legal proceedings, and more battles to come. But the first step had been taken. When Liam returned to the car, he found Laura sitting quietly, staring down at her hands. Her fingers twisted together, as if she were trying to hold on to a fragile hope that things could get better. Liam started the engine and drove away without saying a word. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The man was fired and publicly exposed, losing not only his job, but also his reputation. Liam ensured that all evidence was turned over to the authorities and closely monitored the progress of the investigation. Laura continued to help with everything, providing more documents and information. She remained by Liam's side through every step, but the silence between them grew heavier with each passing day. Even as they worked together to undo the damage, it became painfully clear that some things might never be repaired. Liam knew that something inside him had broken beyond repair. The house felt bigger and emptier with each passing day. Conversations between them became shorter, and Liam chose to sleep in the guest room. The distance between them grew, a silent barrier neither of them could break. Laura tried to get closer. She attempted to start conversations, to bridge the gap, but Liam always kept his distance. One night, while he was packing some boxes in the office, Laura quietly entered the room. She stood there for a moment before finally asking, "Is there any chance for us?" Liam didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between them as he carefully placed a book into a box. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I don't know," he said, his voice steady but distant. "I want to believe we can rebuild everything. But I don't know if I can forget." Laura's eyes filled with tears. She didn't argue or beg. Instead, she nodded, wiping her cheeks. "I'll do my best," she said softly. "I'll prove that we're still worth fighting for." Liam didn't respond. He returned to packing, his mind elsewhere. A few weeks later, Liam made a decision. He told Laura that he needed time to think, to understand what he truly felt. "I'm leaving," he said quietly. "I need to figure out who I am without all of this." Laura nodded, though her heart sank. She knew what his words meant. Liam packed his things and left. He walked away from not just the house, but from everything they had shared within its walls. The memories, the laughter, the pain, all of it stayed behind as he closed the door. While Liam tried to rebuild himself, Laura was left alone. She continued to work and collaborate with the investigation, ensuring that the man who had manipulated her faced justice. But guilt followed her like a shadow, never letting her rest. Even though she knew she had tried to make things right, she couldn't forgive herself. Liam, on the other hand, found new clarity. Distance gave him a fresh perspective. He met new people, immersed himself in his work, and slowly began to rediscover who he was without Laura by his side. The pain didn't disappear, but it dulled over time. He still thought about her, about the life they once shared. But he knew deep down that he couldn't go back to the past. He had to keep moving forward, even if it meant leaving behind a piece of himself. The last time they saw each other was in court, during the final hearing in the case against the man who had tried to destroy their lives. Liam and Laura exchanged brief glances, but neither spoke. The silence between them said everything that needed to be said. When the hearing ended, they left through separate doors, walking away in opposite directions. It was the final, undeniable symbol of the end of their story. Liam stepped outside the courthouse, the cool air hitting his face. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he stood by his car. A mix of relief and sadness settled over him. He knew he had done the right thing by standing up for himself, by fighting against those who tried to ruin him. But that victory had come at a high price. With one last glance at the courthouse behind him, Liam got into his car. He took a moment to steady himself, then started the engine and drove off, determined to begin a new chapter. He was ready to move on,